I am an average man, with an average amount of skeletons in his closet. The mistakes I've made are forgivable, yet numerous. Insignificant, yet frequent. But some skeletons are buried so deep, mired in such wrath and outrage that they climb back to the surface and force you to confront them. This isn't one of those times. Or maybe it is. I think like 3 people care, or even remember for that matter, but that's not important. This is something I owe to myself. If you were around several years ago, you'll have remembered a very particular piece of digital litter I produced that ranks the 10 worst spells in Dark Souls 3. And after producing the feature films I have been lately, I recognize that these are just pussy numbers now, and we don't need that. That needs to change. Some placements, such as Profaned Flame and Seek Guidance, were entirely reasonable. Others, there's a benchmark of quality this channel aims to fulfill. So, let's fulfill it. There's an entire industry out there that thrives off of wrongfully selling your personal data, taking advantage of your vulnerability, holding your data hostage, and in some recent cases, implementing forced arbitration that takes away your ability to take action against companies, allowing them to do this exact thing without any legal consequence. NordVPN double encrypts all your personal data, making it impossible for said companies to actually do anything with it. It also comes with a threat protection feature that helps you pinpoint dodgy Discord links from scammers, and a dark web monitor that searches deeper parts of the internet for any of your leaked credentials. If you purchase the 2-year plan using my link in the description and pinned comment, you'll even receive 4 free months as a bonus. If you're out in public somewhere at an airport, or if you just don't want your internet provider doing risky shit with your data, a safe and secure VPN is the only correct answer you'll ever need. When you download it, it's literally as simple as just pressing connect, or you can just tell it to launch upon PC startup and it'll automatically connect to a valid location without you even needing to do anything. Every purchase of the 2-year plan comes with 4 additional months for free using the link nordvpn.com/rustyvpn in the description and pinned comment. And if there's ever any second thoughts, then you have a 30-day money-back guarantee along with it. Number 106, Aural Decoy. All the sorcery revealed to me was that half the enemies in this game are barely qualified to be mall cops, let alone guards of some ancient treasured city. Enemy reactions to this sorcery fly in the face of everything I thought I knew about enemy AI in these games. They could have done anything. They could have walked towards it to check it out. They could have ran away if they thought the sound was threatening enough. They could have unzipped their trousers and pissed on it. Anything but stand there and look at it for 2 fucking seconds before just being like, it must have been the wind, like a goddamn Skyrim NPC. I thought the albinoric pots in Elden Ring were bad, but oh my god, this is actually inexcusable. A real person on the team developed an entire sorcery around the same end result as throwing a rock at a wall. This costs actual FP, like, to use. Number 105, Cast Light. I'm honestly surprised this one didn't end up higher. You'd think with the general setting this game is in, there would be plenty enough instances where you just be down in Carthus or something thinking, wow, I can't see shit. But even in the game's darker areas, you can pretty effectively make out what everything in front of you is exactly supposed to be. Even during parts of the game where you had to walk on rafters and stuff to collect certain items, I rarely ever saw any practical point in dedicating a spell slot to this. I can't think of a reason to justify the lack of darkness in this particular game either. Both Elden Ring and Dark Souls 1 had plenty of areas unlit enough to legitimize the use of a sorcery like this, so it has nothing to do with the game's age. I don't know, I can't think of a single reason to use this. Number 104, Seek Guidance. Allows you to see more summoning signs, but disables summoning. Cool. Yes, I understand what its purpose is. Everyone understands what it's supposed to do. Nobody likes wasting an ember, I get that. But realistically, what would you do if you used the spell and didn't find any summon signs? Would you actually walk all the way back to the fucking bonfire and unequip the spell? Would you honestly waste that much time instead of just using an ember, not finding anything, and being like, oh well, at least I have more HP now, let's go again? The Scholar's Candlestick highlights extra messages anyways without using a spell slot, and the only reason people use the co-op feature is to request help for killing bosses. There's no need to double check whether or not a summon sign is going to be next to a fog gate. You're next to a fog gate. Where else in the game would a summon sign even be? Number 103, Acid Surge. Man, shit just sucks. I don't even know what else to write here. Weapon durability is exclusively a player function, so I thought I would at least have some luck trying it on NPC enemies, but because it inflicts 8 durability damage if your target somehow manages to face fuck the whole cloud because he's so goddamn stupid, I eventually got bored after 5 minutes of trying to proc the effect and just kill them outright. Don't even try to make this work. It's not worth it. It's not a meme. It's not funny. It's a bad time. Number 102, Homeward. When Homeward bones are as plentiful and as unchallenging to obtain as they are in Dark Souls 3, it's no wonder less than half the people who've even played this game know this is a spell. It has precisely one use, and that use is to run into the boss room to recollect your souls, find a pillar to hide behind, and promptly exit the premises. Wait, nope, shit, never mind, that's not even completely true, because your souls actually spawn outside of the arena in certain situations, like when you're about to challenge Wolnir. So its one consistent use isn't even an actual consistent use 100% of the time. Number 101, Hidden Weapon. This sorcery has always sucked, and I genuinely do not know how it's intended to be used. It sucked marginally less in Elden Ring due to the player's ability to customize weapon ashes on basic plus 25 weapons, but most basic weapons in this game have the same or a similar weapon art inherently tied to it that can't be changed. I really strained my mental capacity to think of exactly one use for it, and that was to put it on the Winged Knight Halberd and trick people into thinking you're going for a strong attack when you're actually using the weapon art. And this game's 8 years old, so like there's no way in hell someone hasn't already thought of that. Number 100, Way of White Corona. It's ass when you use it, it's ass when Gale uses it, it's just a hot bag of ass in the middle of New York City in July. Even when you try your best to ignore it, there's always a temptation there to find some redemptive quirk about it so you can be the person in the community to finally speak up and say that others are using it wrong. The angle at which it returns to you obviously depends on player location, and that disc is really fucking small, so you better be able to draw a straight line that goes right between your target's thighs, or else it's not hitting anything. It also has a longer travel distance than people think, meaning you're very likely to just pitch it straight into the wall behind the enemy, completely voiding its return journey. I have gotten lucky a couple times and caught someone on the very end of its distance where it just kind of hovers there awkwardly and continues dealing damage, but that'll only ever happen to you by accident. Number 99, Twisted Wall of Light. Good lord, imagine dedicating an entire spell slot to BM. There are so many different utility spells in your repertoire you'd be better off equipping instead of this. Everyone who tries to use this sorcery ends up finding out it's much easier to just obey your instincts and roll out of the damn way. But no, you go ahead, you go for those style points, buddy. I'm gonna watch you eat a soul spear because you were too busy scrolling through your 9 spell slots instead of dodging like a normal person. Number 98, Repair. Guys, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's actually not useless. In fact, it has exactly 3 uses. Moonlight Greatsword, Frayed Blade, Washing Pole. That's it. Those are your 3 uses. If you're not using any of those weapons, let it sink to the bottom recesses of your memory where it belongs and choose something else. Number 97, Profuse Sweat. Another resistance buff spell. And as you can easily see by the quintet of dumbass bars in the middle of my screen, this is a problem FromSoft has been running into for a long time. I don't know how long it takes for the resistances to fully deplete. I didn't measure it. I didn't measure it out of principle because it shouldn't be there in the first damn place. The only idea I have to counteract the slow decay and give yourself the full 60 seconds without wasting items would be to use the spell and immediately rest at a bonfire, which resets all your resistances to 0. And maybe pick a different fucking spell since you're already there. Number 96, Poison Mist. I don't need to give you an argument as to why this sucks because FromSoft themselves have already done that for me. The very existence of Poison Mothflight facilitating the use of poison builds in Elden Ring is a full admittance to the suckage of this pyromancy. They knew exactly how badly this shit needed help. 7 flat HP damage and 0.07 of the target's max HP for 90 seconds. That's 630 to maybe like 660 total damage if I'm being as nice as I possibly can. 2 swings with a straight sword can accomplish everything this pyromancy does in a fraction of the time it takes to wait it out. Yeah, no thanks. Number 95, Crystal Hail. Crystal Hail is a solemn reminder that some people will defend anything just because the general opinion is that it sucks. They could patch in a cheese grater and at least 2 of you fuckers would start telling people how underrated it is as a shield. Crystal Hail is a bad sorcery with glaring issues that can be fixed simply by equipping something else. Not a single thing this spell tries to do another spell in the game's library doesn't already accomplish. Zoning? Use Pestilent Mist. Damage against large, slow targets? Soulstream, Chaos Storm, Divine Pillars. FP efficiency? Literally any soul arrow sorcery. If you think it's good or if you want it to be good, I understand you, but I will still laugh at you. I will laugh at you because trying to argue a case for it while firing half your FP bar into the fucking ceiling is objectively hilarious. Actually, you know, this makes me like legitimately upset. I'm just gonna fix this right now since I'm here. All right, let's just open up Map Studio. What's the bullet ID? All right, here. Okay, let's just slow this down a little, and we can just turn this like way down. Just give me a minute, okay? Just let me cook. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Nope, still sucks. Okay, let's just turn this down. Adjust the launch angle, which will spread them out a little more. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, that looks way better. All right, let's test damage. Oh, bitch. Bitch, look at this. Look at how much better this is now. I didn't even need to change the damage on it. Yeah, see? Sometimes all you need is a bit of tracking and a will to live. Number 94, Heal Aid. I know it's fast, I know it gets better with high faith, I don't give a shit. I guess if I'm really stretching my limit for all the good I can argue here, it is castable even if you don't meet the requirements. You know, that unrealistically high expectation of 15 faith. I just don't like highlighting something that obviously isn't intentional and calling it a positive for something. 150 total healing straight out of the box, no matter what catalyst you cast it with. You could get more healing from a regen setup using Pontiff's Left Eye and the Old Wolf Sword. And when I, of all people, start advocating for regen builds, you know we're in bad shape. Number 93, Caressing Tears. I wouldn't call this a criticism of Elden Ring, but I did in fact point out a lot of times why I was never a fan of items like dappled cured meat or talismans like the mottled necklace. You are rarely ever, if at all, being threatened by multiple status ailments at once. The only way curing multiple ailments at once would ever be beneficial in Dark Souls 3 would be if you're fighting bleed-inflicting enemies like evangelists or something in a poisoned lake. And to my knowledge, that literally never happens, so. Number 92, Atonement. Spells like this just really make me wish the co-op experience was more multifaceted than just helping people kill a boss. It seems like once games like this have been out for more than a few weeks, the co-op experience vastly diminishes compared to what it was at the beginning, simply because everyone's played the game and knows the ins and outs. I like the spell as a concept, but when Skull Ring and Moaning Shield exist, I'd really rather just have a free spell slot open for something more useful. Number 91, Deep Protection. Jack of all trades, but a master of none condensed into a single miracle. A shotgun buff, if you will. It's a play made by indecisive builds ran by indecisive players who are still getting blue screened at the mere ask of which stat they should allocate. If your stat points look like this at level 100, you're probably a fan of Deep Protection. It's a buff that provides a safety net for players who don't like thinking too much about what their build could actually do well, and instead employ the shotgun-esque approach of taking a handful of buffs and smearing it across their character's face, hoping it'll work for whatever comes next. It's a little bit of damage absorption with a teensy bit of damage dealt, topped off with a negligible resistance increase of every single stat, and 3 stamina regen, which sounds underwhelming, but funnily ends up being the most useful part of the whole effect. Number 90, Farron Dart. Oh, okay, what? You think I placed this too low? Alright, go kill Nameless King with it. Go on, go ahead. Go kill Nameless King. You have 50 intelligence. Shit, I'll even give you the Izalith staff. If you can get past the Abyss Watchers using nothing but this spell and not soft lock yourself due to FP loss, I will shut the fuck up forever. I am so tired of constantly hearing the it's a utility excuse as though we don't already have like 19 of those to choose from. Like, look at the base damage on this. This shit sucks. Number 89, Carthus Beacon. It's just not good. I'm sorry, it's not. Tying an aggro-centric effect to a 30-second timer is always going to feel awkward no matter how powerful it is. I think this effect feels much more comfortable on the Rotten Winged Sword Talisman, and for that matter on Pontiff's Right Eye just as well. Like, I don't even need to go outside the game to find a better example of this. Granted, the two are stackable, I guess, but Power Within still gives you more overall attack without tying it to a particular condition and with 5 less FP, and it only occupies 1 slot. This is one of those buffs that I think only exists to facilitate the use of other items with similar effects like Pontiff's Right Eye and the Old Wolf Sword. Because if I'm not loading out with exactly that build, I can't think of a single instance where I would actually prefer having this over Power Within. Number 88, Divine Pillars of Light. The living, breathing embodiment of style points not always being the most important thing on a build. 190 physical damage for a miracle this big of a deal, and with this much ceremony and build-up behind it, is absurdly disappointing. It's got an active hitbox duration of 2 seconds, which in my personal opinion is the first and final nail on the coffin for PvE, because 2 seconds just might as well be the entire goddamn spell. Maybe it would be a little better if the hitbox duration was like short enough to allow multiple hits on larger targets, but I'm incredibly lucky if I see an enemy receiving so much as 2 hits from the same cast. And even still, that's only ever against enemies of a certain size. Maybe if you're literally standing under the Wyvern's ballsack in Archdragon's Peak, you can get it to hit twice. Number 87, Firestorm. Again, with the hitbox duration bullshit. Why is it 2 seconds long? What is it with enemies not being able to take multiple hits from the same cast? Like, that's seriously the one saving grace I think could actually give spells like this a bit of comeuppance and still have them feel risky and dangerous to pull off. I mean, Burn of Flame did that pretty successfully in Elden Ring, so I guess that nullifies most of my complaining. But I feel like Burn of Flame is also a different case altogether because the bullet physics don't completely work the same way. I don't know. I just feel like I could literally knock this one variable down to like 0.6 or something and have it work 10 times as good as it used to. It's still not perfect, but at least I'm getting damage numbers that somewhat justifies the FP cost and large window of vulnerability. Number 86, Profaned Flame. The knockback is the only good utility this pyromancy will ever have. If you're a fan of the whole don't let him play approach to handling encounters in this game, I would recommend something infinitely more versatile like Boulder Heave or Emit Force. Profaned Flame, on the other hand, speeds right past wherever you're trying to land it most of the time before disappearing with a little cartoon-esque FUT and 30 of your FP. It's technically a zoning AoE pyromancy that shares its hitbox size with Fire Orb at a staggering 1.5 Miyazaki's when fully expanded, accompanied with a delay just long enough for whatever you're aiming at to finish its lunch before calmly stepping out of the way. Number 85, Lightning Spear. Whew, boy, this one's just sad. Actually, no, it's not. Lightning Spear in Dark Souls 3 is indisputable proof that people can learn from their mistakes, and on that principle alone, I'm willing to be nice. Lightning Spear in this game has a secondary hitbox that deals an extra chunk of lightning damage to enemies within your melee range, but without any sort of visual cue to clue you in on that hitbox ever existing unless you're hitting something within that melee range. This essentially means your first time dealing this spell's fully intended damage on a target is going to be by complete fucking accident. The description doesn't even help with this either. It's just flavor text about the Warriors of Sunlight not beating the allegations or whatever. I don't know. Who the fuck cares? Number 84, Dead Again. It was this spell that actually opened my eyes to how exhausting it must be being the guy that comes up with all the magic. Here's a bunch of forward-moving projectile spam that'll inevitably dominate magic builds for the rest of time, or at least until the Convergence mod comes out.
Ew, these spells are boring. Can't FromSoft come up with anything better?
Okay, well, here's a miracle that transforms corpses into ticking time bombs by rewarding spatial awareness and knowledge of enemy attacks with an opportunity to do massive bursts of damage.
Ew, this spell is boring. It should have had a bigger hit radius and more damage and better scaling and more flexibility with different catalysts.
I wouldn't take any of this personally, FromSoft. Backseat game balancing is just how we entertain ourselves sometimes. Like, I've proven that point alone 3 times in the last, 10 minutes. That again is a wonderful idea with a botched execution that only ever really fits on gimmick builds. I like that it scales completely with your faith stat, mostly because it's a way to inflict some good dark damage without relying on specific catalyst boosts. The windup gives a lot of time for enemies to move out of the way of the blast, and the area radius of 2 certainly doesn't help, but it is pretty satisfying when you can actually get someone mentally plunged enough to walk over a glowing purple corpse. Number 83, Soul Arrow. Yep, that's magic damage as fuck right there. Number 82, Great Lightning Spear. Yep, that's lightning damage as fuck right there. Number 81, Soul Stream. It's great if you like dicking around on bridges for 10 minutes fishing for Discord clips, but in any practical situation, 55 FP for this amount of damage that isn't even guaranteed to connect fully will never be worth it. Situational doesn't even begin to properly represent the single-digit amount of uses for this sorcery. It's good to blast Dragon Slayer armor with while he spends the first few minutes of the fight picking his ass up off the floor while you cross the fog gate, and I guess if you try really, really hard, you can line up a decent shot on one of the Abyss Watchers, but anything outside of slow lumbering idiots looking for a shit to give, you're gonna have a hard time finding a good target. Number 80, Seething Sunlight. Okay, I just want to further clarify the complete lack of PvP experience I have with this game in particular, but just looking at the telegraph alone, I feel like I know exactly what would happen if you ever tried to use this in an aggressive lobby. You just do not need this much healing. Like, you literally never need this much healing. Soothing Sunlight needs 200 stamina to cast, which is not even possible to reach in-game, even with 99 endurance and the Ring of Favor. This means there will always be a short period of vulnerability where you can't do ass against anything trying to kill you. Immediately rolling out of the way of something after the animation ends is just not something you'll be able to do. I just stick to medium heal or great heal. Number 79, Fire Surge. I'm not sure how I feel about this pyromancy. The hitbox duration of 0.7 seconds makes it incredibly difficult to deal any meaningful damage if you're just holding the button down, and edging it by timing the cast to where you're just letting out little spurts of flame is probably the most FP efficient way to kill anything if you have the attention span for it, but the synergy it has with sorceries like Snap Freeze is comically effective against enemies weak to Frostbite, narrowing its total amount of uses down to 2, finishing off players who use Tears of Denial and resetting Frostbite. Oh my god, I completely forgot this game does it too. Number 78, Chaos Storm. Honestly, if you didn't have any luck getting mileage out of Firestorm, adding some magma pools and upping its cost to 2 slots to disguise it as something worth a baker's fuck isn't gonna make a huge difference. It'll make a small difference, because at least you've got 2 separate instances of damage. 195 base fire damage isn't as chonky as it sounds, not even by Dark Souls 3 standards, and it's worth noting the double zeros for the stat requirement, I guess, but why? It still needs at least 55 FP to fully cast a single time, so there's no need to pretend this spell is within reach of any build that isn't cast focused. It still has the hyper armor of a wet potato and the payoff of throwing that wet potato across the room and then patching up the hole in your wall. Number 77, Soul Spear. A few of you might be confused by the low placement on this one because I think a lot of people tend to view the Crystal Soul Spear as its only direct competition. However, one key detail about the Soul Spear is that it requires Logan's Scroll in order for it to be taught to you, which is an item you cannot get until you've gained access to the Profaned Capital. Meanwhile, Orbex sells you the Great Heavy Soul Arrow for 4,000 souls immediately upon finding him. This sorcery has 10 less base damage than Soul Spear, while only needing 14 FP to cast compared to the Spear's 32. The only downside is the slightly annoying wind-up time, which most casting builds have no problem dealing with. This dooms the Soul Spear into permanent obsolescence the second you pick it up. It's only good due to its straightforward upfront damage, and that's something you can find on plenty of different spells that are much more efficient and tend to have other utilities. Number 76, Toxic Mist. It's very fine. If you're the kind of player who takes an E and winds down the clock once you've done your job, then I guess the 1400 damage over time is worth idling around while you're warming up something in the microwave, but controlled proactivity is the best way to take down anything you wish. It also aggroes enemies, unlike its slightly shittier cousin-in-law, and it's a bit difficult to idle your way to victory with a sword between your ass cheeks. There's no poison moth flight here to give you some easy damage, so you're on your own. Number 75 and number 74, Crystal and Great Magic Weapon. Not inherently bad on their own, especially when considering the flat damage increases given to you by each buff, but it only takes a 3rd grade comprehension of math to very quickly see that the FP costs for these 2 buffs versus regular old magic weapon are by no means an economic choice. I'm a firm advocate for killing shit faster when the situation requires it, FP efficiency be damned, but we're talking about a total base damage discrepancy of 10 fucking points, in addition to an unnecessarily shortened duration on both the 2nd and 3rd tier variants. This sort of decision seems incredibly deliberate, like someone on the team was afraid these 2 sorceries would be too good or something. Number 73, Farron Flashsword. Flashsword gives us a bit of insight into whatever balancing decisions created the 16-cylinder genocide machine that is the Carian Slicer. This sorcery is both its predecessor and is infinitely worse on all accounts. The base damage of 103 places it in direct competition with Soul Arrow, but the casting animations are sequential even if the speed of the actual casting seems to get increasingly lazier each time I use it. Maybe one day I'll boot up the game in several years and I'll go to cast it and the sword just breaks off like a rotten banana and it permanently disables the spell. Very unlike the 180 base damage and significantly speedier casting time of its distant cousin. I think what happened here was just a classic case of overcompensation, where a subset of people couldn't shut up about how awful the spell is, so From's balancing team took it to heart and made it their personal mission to ensure those exact same motherfuckers see that spell in their nightmares for the next 3 years. Number 72, Wrath of the Gods. The grueling section of the video has officially ended. It's mediocrity at the bare minimum from here on out, and my general attitude towards the next like 30 entries on this whole list could only be imparted with less elation and zest if I were actually a corpse. This miracle used to be good, like it really did. I'm not sure what decisions led to this outcome, I just know that I don't like it and you need to change it back. If anything, I repeat, anything requires 2 spell slots of me while also asking 40 FP, it had better carry my limp ass all the way to the end of the game and order me a fucking pizza while I watch the credits. If its performance is anything short of that, I'm just not interested and you shouldn't be either. Sage Ring doesn't even come close to fixing its terrible casting time, but the upfront damage, I guess, is great enough to convince most players that it's just barely worth the investment. Number 71, Bountiful Sunlight. Two spell slots. 2 spell slots for a heal. Alright, wonder where this one's going on the list. I don't know. I mean, honestly, it's fine for a regen spell. 2 spell slots is far and away its single most debilitating drawback. There is one specific bullet point I think is important enough to bring up, which is that it is a vicinity heal, and not specific to the players like the others, amplifying its potential power during co-op sessions. But if you fit in with most of the game's player base and don't have any friends, this turns into an extremely niche positive that isn't usually explored in most coordinated sessions, let alone someone pulling a rando in their world to kill a boss. Unless you're taking direct advantage of this benefit, 70 FP and 2 slots is a massive ask for the least efficient regen spell in the game. Number 70, Homing Soulmass. Multi-hit spells of any kind being bottlenecked are one of the world's eternally unsolvable problems. One of the many misfortunes in life, such as war or my vital organs functioning. The amount of soul masses that spawn being determined by your intelligence level I think is a nice little nuance, but adding another projectile to a spell that gets bottlenecked at lower intelligence levels specifically because of its multi-hit nature is right up there with air-conditioned underwear as one of humanity's worst ideas. This means essentially all of its value comes from its utility of forcing an enemy dodge to line them up for a much more powerful spell. This exact utility also pissed off lots of people in PvP for years, but if you're looking for it to do any significant damage, it's best to wait until higher intelligence levels where those flat defenses don't mean shit about fuck. Number 69, Darkmoon Blade. I don't get this one. I really don't get it at all. The placement at which it's found is significantly more out of the way than other magic weapon buffs, even including Crystal Magic Weapon. 50 FP cost and a 60-second duration despite having the same flat magic damage applied as Crystal Magic Weapon, and it just feels like this paltry toss to faith builders that want access to the magic element. Like, sure, here you go, here's your magic buff. You ungrateful fucks. Okay, so if mages bitch enough about not having a lightning buff, does that mean we're gonna get it? No, seriously, does it? Number 68, Bursting Fireball. Okay, so yeah, this one has problems. And it isn't even related to its multi-hit spread, although it is certainly not a positive in the early game. Having your projectile split into 4 different instances of damage means you're only going to get the full impact by literally punching someone with it. Fire Orb, on the other hand, is available slightly earlier, costs slightly less souls to pick up, and with the same FP expense, which actually surprised me quite a bit, because I always thought Fire Orb consumed a little more, but nope, it's just 14. I think that might have to do with people picking it up earlier when their stats are likely lower, and so the FP consumption feels like it's more proportionally. I don't know, I have no fucking idea. All I know is they have the same FP cost despite Fire Orb being infinitely more consistent. It's a shotgun spell that shoots little white flags with the word bang written on it. It's just not worth it. Number 67, Lightning Blade. Lightning Blade is the single most expensive and out-of-the-way weapon buff you ever acquire. Carthus Flame Arc only needs 10 intelligence and faith. Magic Weapon uses literally half the amount of FP. Fucking Dark Blade needs less investment than this. It's not even that bad of a buff, it's just as fine as all the others, but there's no reason why a knockoff Sunbro Miracle should be the most stat-demanding buff to access. Where's the upgraded variant of this? Why isn't there a Sunlight Blade Miracle? Oh, because it would probably ask for the deed to my fucking house, that's why. Number 66, Dark Blade. I used the example of Dark Blade needing less resources to cast as a means of explaining why I didn't particularly like Lightning Blade, but I honestly don't share a fondness for Dark Blade for the exact same reason. 35 FP cost is still a little much, especially for a buff that deals less flat damage than the aforementioned, and only lasts 60 seconds. But it's the only option available for dark damage weapon buffs the game gives us, so that means I have to like it no matter what. Number 65, Force. I'm not going to pretend a miracle that costs anything whatsoever and deals 0 damage isn't deserving of at least a few light kicks in the ribs, but I think that's the popular thing to do. Force is a utility spell through and through. It is a utility spell because utility is all it can offer. I understand the value of being able to CC dumbasses off the sides of cliffs half the time, if it feels like it, but even if we're approaching this from a PvP perspective, if somebody is hanging out near the edge of a cliffside throwing gestures at someone, anyone with an IQ higher than the weight of the fat content in their fucking stomach is gonna look at that and be like, I don't think I'm going over there. Nope, that smells like shittery to me. Number 64, Fireball. Yep. Here it is, 64th place, and I ain't changing my mind this time. Fire Orb can be picked up very early in the game for 3,000 souls and cast at the expense of 4 more FP. It's plenty small enough and FP efficient enough to last you up until the endgame. This pyromancy is not your all reliable. This one is. Use Fire Orb. It's literally the signature flame manipulating spell. Even the item description tells you this is what you should be using. Insanely powerful at lower levels? Cool, so is Fire Orb. High build accessibility due to incredibly low requirements? Wonder what other pyromancy has that. Number 63, Great Farron Dart. It's the fastest spell in the game, which counts for at least something. It's just barely able to tickle the balls of what's considered decent sustained damage at higher intelligence levels, but still raises the question of whether or not FP efficiency is worth it if it takes you an entire entire day to kill a single boss. It's certainly fun and easy to use, and it has its own utility benefits, but you're better off sticking to your great heavy soul arrows and crystal spears if you're looking for meaningful damage. And honestly, if you only use the spell for the utility, there's nothing stopping you from using regular Farron Dart for the same purposes. Number 62, Great Soul Arrow. It's greater than regular, it's lighter than heavy, and it's still only 150 magic damage up front. It's not really all that good. But for 10 FP for cast, it serves as a good backup in case you don't feel like plugging all your remaining FP into another Crystal Hail that's destined to tongue fuck the ceiling 5 feet above you. Number 61, Seething Chaos. It's just roiling magma, that's what it is. 392 base fire damage. It makes this one of the most powerful spells in the game if you're going strictly by the numbers. It only deals a little over half that if you fire it into somebody's face, very clearly telling the player that they should be aiming to set this up as a trap somewhere instead of treating it like a straightforward projectile. With a godlike amount of foresight, this'll hit like a mid-afternoon traffic jam, but the ultimate problem lies in its complexity. It's not that the learning curve is impossible or anything, but it's inevitably left behind by lower effort and more uncomplicated options like CBV, the Fire Orb family, Black Flame, and even some sorceries like Crystal Spear and Great Soul Dregs simply due to their ease of use. Number 60, White Dragon Breath. Every sorcery that gets lifted from Dark Souls 1 just becomes a sad, pitiful smattering of what it used to be. This sorcery has a secondary hitbox very close to melee range that hits for 110 magic damage in addition to the rest of the spell's 265. In this specific situation, the sorcery is actually pretty damn powerful, but if I have enough time to watch the whole thing spool up while also being close enough to guarantee the secondary hit, I'm almost definitely standing behind a motherfucker with his back turned. Like, that's the only situation in this game that allots me that amount of time to do something. At which point, you should probably just go for the critical. I understand this gives the sorcery a huge learning curve to use and time correctly. However, bitch, have you considered learning curves are for intelligence-bereft soul arrow spammers that need a bit of spice in their playstyle? I grinded 50 intelligence for this. Let me have a laser sorcery that just fucks everything sideways. It's what I deserve and it's what I worked for. Number 59 and 58, Replenishment and Bountiful Light. I've never been a fan of regen builds, probably never will, but I do understand the niche involved with regen spells like these two. Using this in tandem with Blessed Weapon, Warmth, and other regen equipment can really pull these effects out of the gutter, especially on builds that utilize the Lloyd's Sword and Shield rings. There are certain builds that reward the player's ability to maintain full health, and you'd always rather use a miracle like this than waste a flask charge over 20 hit points. They are useful, don't get me wrong, but they only ever seem useful enough when they have other regen effects helping them out. Replenishment alone is not ideal. Bountiful Light alone is still not ideal. They're perfectly fine where they are balance-wise, but they need quite a lot of help from other regen items to make a build that's actually tailored to them. Number 57, Frozen Weapon. Really? Not even like 10 magic damage as a second benefit? You had no problem making Blessed Weapon into the weird fucked up sandwich of buffs that it is, but you can't even put a little bit of magic on this one? All we have is Frostbite? Alright, cool. I'm unsure how upset I should be at this because most bosses are actually extremely susceptible to this status, and save for a couple small details that don't really matter too much, Frostbite in this game is pretty similar to how it worked in Elden Ring. It makes quick work of Osiris and Dragon Slayer armors, Corvian Knights and Millwood Knights, both Gunjers suck pretty bad against it. I guess Frostbite alone is fine enough, but if you make the mistake of running into an enemy you didn't know was immune, that buff is officially and factually a waste of space. Number 56, Sunlight Spear. Okay, I'm terribly sorry, but this miracle just gets way too much respect. The miracle itself is decent. It's more than enough upfront damage to finally convince people they should take lightning miracles a little seriously. A gateway spell, if you will. There's just one big problem. It's literally unavailable for the whole goddamn game on a first run. Sunlight Spear is obtainable via soul transposition by using the Soul of Cinder's soul. This relegates the Sunlight Spear to either a DLC exclusive miracle or a New Game Plus miracle altogether. And by DLC, I mean the Ring City, because that's the only area with a higher scaling than the base endgame. The damage is enough to outright annihilate foes in melee range, but I can pay way less than 48 FP to have similar power in the form of Black Flame, Great Chaos Fire Orb, or CBV. Actually, come to think of it, if you're counting the lava, Great Chaos Fire Orb just has higher overall damage anyways. Number 55, Floating Chaos. I like it. It's fun. It's probably the king of roll-catching NPC enemies. I think I and a lot of others still prefer spells like Affinity and Crystal Soulmass, but the added benefit of the bullets firing independently of the player can allow you to really easily combo the hit into a spell with longer casting time or lower hyper armor, or even provide some healing cover if you need it. With a little help from the Sage Ring, you can even have two active at roughly the same time. The stagger power isn't great, but you can tell just by its damage that it's meant to be a utility spell first and foremost. But it only needs 20 FP, so it's not like you're giving giving your left kidney or something for a single cast. It's decent. That's about it. Number 54, Magic Barrier. The physical location of this spell is in an awkward spot because there are so many magic-using bosses that this could have been great against in the first half of the game, but you can only buy it once you found the Braille Divine Tome of Lothric just before the Dragon Slayer armor fight. I guess you can always kill the Dancer early to get it, but that's yet again an example of a boss that would have been pretty sufficiently inconvenienced by this miracle. I guess it's nice to have heading into the Grand Archives and the subsequent fight with the Twin Princes, but if you want magic damage negation this badly, I feel like you're just better off racing to Archdragon Peak to get the upgraded variant. Number 53, Fire Whip. Every single person with an opinion on this pyromancy talks on forums like they need a fucking vacation. Every Souls game has the one spell that gets bullied into cyber oblivion by therapist lacking turbo celibates when it's honestly just fine, or they get a select faction of worshippers and simps that use the word underrated like they just heard someone say it yesterday and are excited they learned a new word. And this one pyromancy somehow ended up finding both groups of people. It can score a maximum of 14 hits on anything glued to the goddamn floor, because that's the only way you're ever going to land the full pyromancy. And this is also where I aptly remind you that the whole deal with multi-hit spells being dog ass up until a certain point rings just as true here as it did in Elden Ring, as it does in most of these games, due to flat damage resistance being the gaudy scam artist that it is. It's incredibly FP efficient when it lands, but minor mistakes can lead to a lot of damage just getting lost because the spell didn't fucking feel like it or something. Number 52, Warmth. The healing output of this pyromancy is schizophrenic levels of crazy, if you cast it in a place where you're able to stand close enough to it and long enough for it to matter. It also heals enemies within the vicinity, but it's only a tiny bit, and even minor chip damage from something can be easily enough to chew right through it. Two major downsides, and they are pretty major, they're pretty up there. One being it only heals in a radius of 2, meaning you better be clutching this little spark in between your ass cheeks if you actually want it to do anything. And 2, it needs 2 spell slots to equip. Again, that is 2 spell slots for a heal. Granted, it's a pretty damn nice heal, and it explores a bit of synergy with area denial spells like Force and Wrath of the Gods that allow players to control a safe area while healing. It just needs a bit of extra attention to actually play around comfortably, but it can and will save you from the brink of death at the cost of 2 spell slots and 50 FP. Number 51 and 50 and 49. Great heal, heal, and medium heal. They heal you, and since there's thankfully not a VC function in duels, the amount of tears cried by your opponents in response to your healing will never matter. And yes, that amount includes the number 0. Healing in duels is such an emotionally charged and downright exhausting topic that both sides just talk like they're on a fucking pedestal, so I'm just not going near it. Instead, I'm just gonna do what I do best and chart some numbers. Firstly, spell buff doesn't matter. I don't care what you read on Fextra Life, it does not matter. Just stop saying it does. I've tested it like 35 times. The amount healed on any of these is directly determined by your faith stat. At 25 faith, the regular heal restores 362, medium heal restores 496, and great heal restores 665. So by dividing these numbers by the amount of FP per cast, we can determine their overall FP efficiency, and it looks like the medium heal winds up being the most efficient with a little over 33 health restored per 1 FP. Number 48, Blessed Weapon. A little extra damage and a little health regen. Honestly, when I first read the description, I assumed it meant that it healed upon successive attacks like Pontiff's Right Eye, but nope, it's just 5 HP per second no matter what you're doing. Go take a piss, you'll come back fully healthy again. I'm not going to pretend that actually helps in any way, but tying a stackable health regen to a weapon buff is honestly a cool idea, so I think it's worth a little praise. 7.5% more physical damage ends up being slightly more than it feels like due to you still only inflicting a single type of damage despite having a weapon buff, but I feel like that 5 HP regen is preventing too many people from not liking it. Like, the damage isn't that great, but hey, look, it does this other thing here too. That's cool, right? Number 47, Carthus Flame Arc. 80 flat damage versus the 85 given to you by charcoal resin seems like a pretty straightforward choice, but the damage provided by the Flame Arc also scales with faith. You can slap a raw gem on a weapon of your choice and buff it with Flame Arc, and on higher faith builds, it'll actually perform better than chaos-infused weapons. It starts off a little weaker than most buffs, and it certainly needs help getting to a serviceable amount of damage, but when it gets there, you'll realize just how much damage you were ignoring by not doing this. Number 46, Iron Flesh. I dislike Iron Flesh on principle, not because it's a bad pyromancy, it's actually pretty great in the right hands, but only because the severe absence of anything in the same fucking zip code as Hyper Armor makes it laughably difficult to cast anything that doesn't have a 0.2 second casting windup. If you really want to brute force fucking Firestorm or Divine Pillars for some reason, then I guess you can do that, but you're much better off just using it for basic R1 trades with Great Hammers or UGSs. Perhaps a weapon art with a lower Hyper Armor every now and again, just just to keep things fun and exciting, but using this as a means of making your own hyper armor for spells that don't really need it, or spells that flat out don't need to exist to begin with, means you should probably explore some more uses with it, in my opinion. Number 45, Gnaw. Dark damage is the main weakness of some of the most powerful bosses the game ever throws at you, such as Nameless King, Sister Frida, Soul of Cinder, in addition to half the DLC enemies. Moreover, bleed susceptibility goes through the roof towards late to in-game, turning bosses like Lorien, Champion's Gravetender, and the Demon Prince into point-and-click simulators made for 5-year-olds. This puts Gnaw and other dark miracles in really dominant positions PvE-wise. Sadly, there are still plenty of reasons to ignore this miracle altogether once you found Dorhys Gnawing, since it's such an obvious upgrade, but the lazy homing and slowish speed make it pretty much impossible for enemies to avoid by dodging alone, and only seem to avoid it if they get lucky and their AI throws them behind a wall or something by coincidence. Number 44, Power Within. Around 20% more total AR in exchange for maybe a third of your HP, if that. With a good regen build, this becomes one of the best body buffs available. It comes with its own set of drawbacks, the main negative point being its duration of 30 seconds, but the HP loss scaling with maximum HP makes it very comfortable to use no matter where your vigor's at. I personally don't mind the 30-second duration, because any longer and the health drain effect would start to get pretty excruciating to deal with, but the Lingering Dragon Crest Ring does increase its duration without apparently any impact on the final amount of HP lost. Personally, I think the biggest negative with this buff is its incompatibility with other important buffs like Flash Sweat, Iron Flesh, and Magic Barrier. I mean, it makes sense why you wouldn't be able to stack those, but it is a negative since it leaves you to rings and consumables when it comes to damage mitigation. Number 43, Sacred Oath. If you're not familiar with Sacred Oath, but you've played Elden Ring, just think of this as a slightly shittier Golden Vow. 10% more damage, and 10% less damage, depending on who's receiving it. Lasts for exactly 60 seconds unless you have the Lingering Dragon Crest Ring, in which case it'll be 78 seconds. FP consumption is a bit of a turnoff, if I'm being honest. Not really a fan of anything that needs 65 FP to cast, only because the sheer amount of resources it takes almost never justifies the effect itself. But I'm also coming directly from a game that fixed this problem and made Golden Vow somewhat accessible to all different types of builds. So if the only negative bullet point I can say for Sacred Oath is that it's not as good as something that came 6 years after it, then I mean, I don't know, it's probably not the worst spell in the world. Number 42, Heavy Soul Arrow. Longer cast, more better damage. Look, you know what these do already. I'm not giving you a fucking hardback novel for every one of these, alright? Number 41, Sacred Flame. Sacred Flame has innate critical damage, which means it can be boosted by critical damage items, like Aldrich's Sapphire and Ruby, and the series of quick hits at the beginning can even be boosted by Carthus Beacon, but not Pontiff's Left Eye or the Old Wolf Curve Sword for some reason. Only working on humanoid enemies would have been a massive penalty in Elden Ring due to the sheer variety of non-human shit that's hard to kill, but in Dark Souls, the most threatening thing you're ever up against is just a slightly bigger dude with a Zweihander or something. It works on Ringed Knights, Cathedral Knights, pretty much anything classified as a knight it'll work against. You can bypass Crystal Sage's second phase entirely with it, Abyss Watchers can't counter it, Sister Frida just gets nuked. It's only ever kinda useful and almost never a go-to, but something with this much damage just shouldn't get shit on as much as it does. Number 40, Tears of Denial. No, okay, just fucking shut up for a second and just listen. I already said I wasn't gonna be approaching this list with too much of a PvP perspective, so all the animosity you have towards this miracle because of people who abuse it online, just take it and throw it somewhere else, because I didn't ask for it. I genuinely tried to give this miracle a shot, and although it did save me a couple times when I was being clumsy, I honestly just don't get what's such a big deal about it. Most of the enemies in this game aren't towering 5-story tall idiots that take their entire morning shift just to wind up an attack. I didn't even know that one hopping attack the Pontiff had is technically a 2-hit until I tried to cry my way through it and got my shit kicked. Then I had the idea to test it against grab attacks, which didn't work because most grabs tend to have multiple instances of damage, therefore activating the miracle and then subsequently killing me anyways. The only case I could seriously argue for it would be avoiding death via traps, hidden enemies, that dumbass ballista outside the smoldering lake, and other jump scare adjacent moments that you would only get hit by if it was literally your first time playing the game. When it does work, you'll be glad you have it equipped, but I'd rather just go for a damage negation spell. Number 39, Emit Force. You know what? This one was better than I thought it was gonna be. Emit Force has the utility benefits of force, but turned into a straightforward moving projectile that also deals a decent amount of physical damage. It's tempting to go for the meme clip of blasting your brainlet friend off a cliff into their death, but I personally find the spell better suited for stun locks and staggering smaller enemies. Even with its physical damage being what it is, you're still going to want to use this for stamina damage first. It comes with a specialty, and that specialty is firing it at shields and watching them fly back like a sign spinner in a tropical storm. Number 38, Magic Weapon. 30 extra seconds of uptime is an incredible benefit to have when it matters, which makes the regular magic weapon sorcery even more FP efficient than it appears to be. With a base damage discrepancy of 10 separating each level of this sorcery, it almost forces the question of what the point even is in trying to use the other two. Number 37, Old Moonlight. It took me like 7 fucking playthroughs for me to eventually learn that you can hold this one down for a delay. It might be one of the only spells in Dark Souls 3 that are actually chargeable, and that's such a weird discovery coming back from Elden Ring, where most ordinary spells just had this feature built in. The charged bullet is almost twice as strong as the standard one, so you should be looking for as many windows as you possibly can to fully take advantage of it. Unfortunately, there's no Godfrey icon or Axe Talisman to help you out here, but you can still line up some pretty wonderful damage if both the bullet and the sword hits the same enemy. It's got a learning curve, and the FP cost kinda makes it less preferable, but you can also walk around while charging it, and it just feels really nice to use once you get the hang of it. Number 36, Flash Sweat. It's found pretty early into the game. It gives you damage negation versus an extremely common and persisting elemental threat, and it gives you a fighting chance against some of the hardest hitters in the game like dragons and demons. It makes the Demon Prince much easier, and even certain parts of Dark Eater Midir's fight feel way more manageable than without it. This game shares its abundance of the fire element with Elden Ring, so even if you think you're safe from getting a face full of flame, there's probably someone with a candlestick around the corner or something ready to make you regret not equipping this. Number 35, Black Serpent. A fairly reliable source of dark damage that can penetrate through targets, even if it does have the tracking properties of a drunk sorority girl trying to drive a forklift. As long as you remain locked on to whatever you want it to hit, it almost never misses the mark, so the best practice versus a group would be to just target whoever's the furthest away from you and just let the homing decide who it wants to ass fuck this evening. This way, it'll almost definitely hit at least one other enemy. Number 34, Affinity. Choosing between this and Crystal Soulmass is dependent on a lot of extenuating variables. One, are you playing against another actual player in-game? If you aren't, then you can throw this bitch ass in the paper shredder and never look back. I'm kidding. When cast with certain catalysts, the damage actually can climb pretty high. Maybe not enough to give Crystal Soulmass some nice healthy competition, but it fares exceptionally well against faster enemies thanks to its slower speed and decent tracking. It almost makes you forget how traditionally weak multi-hit spells tend to be, at least until the late game. It can even track Sister Frida whether or not she's invincible in any phase of the fight, which is one of those smaller features you're never sure is working 100% as intended. Number 33, Magic Shield. There is exactly one advantage Magic Shield has over its upgraded variant, and it will only ever have one advantage, which is its duration of 60 seconds. I swear to God, it feels like this buff just never runs out. The extra 30% damage negation makes even the smallest buckler in the world feel like you're hiding behind a detached car door, but it specifically excels in blocking magic damage. For every other element, including physical, you get a 30% damage negation increase, but against magic damage, the bonus negation is 70%. This bonus turns most shields of any size into indisputable mage silencers that violently disrespect any instance of magic that dares to even sneeze in your direction. It's a wonderfully convenient tool that spits on more than just mages, and the extra stability allows the tanking of hits from enemies I didn't even know you could block. Number 32, Flame Fan. Flame Fan is very interesting the way it works. So, you know whenever you go for a parry against a staggered enemy, but you're just barely too far away, and you hit them with a normal R1 and it makes a sound that like vaguely resembles someone throwing a wet roll of toilet paper at someone's window? That's called an instability hit. And against player characters, every consecutive hit after the first cast will produce this effect, dealing bonus damage. This results in over 300 damage per cast on a decent build while rivaling the casting speed of Farron Flashsword. If you've ever been on the receiving end of someone who knows how to properly time their casting, you know exactly just how pants on head fucking stupid this is. It also combos very comfortably into Black Flame, which is honestly just the cherry on top of the shit sundae. Number 31, Chameleon. Guys, I think this might be the greatest spell FromSoft has ever made. Calling this sorcery a roided up Mimic Veil wouldn't even be a disservice. It would just be flat out defamation. Literally just pull this out in the middle of an intense fight and everything aggroed on you will suddenly just double take and gaslight themselves into thinking that weird dumbass statue just had a sword in its hands a couple seconds ago. This is a Metal Gear Solid NPC type shit. Whenever I find a player who's never used this sorcery, I start vaguely sounding like I'm trying to invite them into a drug trafficking ring. I'm not kidding. You have to see this shit. So many people have whipped out this spell exactly one time just to spawn the ladder by the Inner Streets bonfire, and then they never touch it again. Like, are you not the least bit curious? Do you have any idea the power you hold in your brittle hands? Don't give me shit like this. I'm gonna be playing an entirely different game. I thought it was supposed to be hunting dragons or something, not playing fucking prop hunt with the boys. Number 30, Farron Hail. This sorcery used to be sewage tier for a good couple months after release until finally enough people voiced a complaint involving its ball-fondlingly low damage, and Farron Hail has honestly been in a fairly workable spot since. The wide outward fanning of bullets makes dodging significantly more difficult, and your build significantly more cancerous. 58 base magic damage isn't much. It's not even in the same legal province as much, but it being able to hit up to 4 times on the same group of targets allows it incredible FP efficiency, if only because you're usually firing this at more than just one dude. From 30 to 40 intelligence, there's really no massive change that's worth noting, but from 50 to 60, the difference in damage just starts getting ridiculous. If you dropped this spell due to its hilarious damage before it got buffed and never picked it back up, I implore you to give it another shot. Number 29, Snap Freeze. Chameleon was funny on purpose. This sorcery, however, is funny for an entirely different and completely unintentional reason. Maybe. It's probably intentional, but it's still funny. In order to understand why this sorcery is as busted as it is, we must first understand the appropriate range. That visual effect is not just flare and fireworks. It looks like it go 50 fucking feet because it do go 50 fucking feet. How many games out there will let you snipe someone with a cloud? Okay, now this is where the comedy comes in. Snap Freeze shows its true power when immediately followed up with a multi-hit pyromancy like Fire Surge or Fire Whip. Floating Chaos also seems to work decently well. This resets the status and, so long as they stay within the cloud, rapidly builds it back up again, repeatedly chunking down tremendous portions of HP at a time. This is another one of those things that don't seem intentional, but it also feels like a strategy that can't easily be nerfed without throwing the game's whole balance into disarray. Like, honestly, how would you nerf this? Lower the Frostbite buildup? It already applies 15 status per tick. Any lower in it might as well not be a spell. Lessen the max HP damage done if you afflict something with Frostbite? Well, that would just make Frostbite cringe and no one would ever use it again. This feels like one of those puzzles you'd find in those shitty brain exercise magazines you used to read in waiting rooms. Number 28, Pestilent Mist. My favorite strategy with this one is to cast it in front of me and just casually jog around the cloud in a circle. Enemies are literally programmed to follow and attack you, so you're likely to accumulate plenty of damage just by moving outside the aura in a way that keeps them close to the AoE. If you're inside a narrow hallway and they escape the cloud, you can always punt someone back into it with Force, Boulder Heave, preemptively charge up a Soul Stream in anticipation that they'll follow you, basically just anything with good enough knockback. There are plenty of spells out there for it. I won't pretend this doesn't take practice, but if you get into a good rhythm of stun locking someone while they're in the AoE, you can rack up damage on a single target into the thousands, all for just 13 measly FP. Number 27, Soul Greatsword. It may not share the damage of an orbital laser like it used to in Dark Souls 2, but 200 base magic damage still takes you a long way when properly built around. This sorcery feels especially comfortable on the Hazel picks since the R1s can combo into the cast animation, and the wide horizontal sweep is great against multiple targets, but if NPC enemies with a brain made of pixels and code have no problem dodging it, then I imagine most PvPers in this game could dodge it literally blindfolded. But its ease of evasion is fortunately its only setback. 23 FP is reasonably low considering its damage, and it's a wonderful sorcery to have in enclosed spaces where physical weapons are likely to ricochet off walls. Number 26, Homing Crystal Soulmass. Okay, I'm legitimately nervous placing this sorcery where I am because the general consensus is that the FP efficiency for its damage is considerably worse than regular Soulmass, which it is. If you're playing like a throbbing dumbass, I didn't keep track of just how many forums and Reddit posts I had to speed read during research for this part, but I actually think we may have found a new piece of info because I haven't seen a single mention of this anywhere. This is a crystal variant of the regular Soulmass, and the reason that's so important is that crystal sorceries can penetrate targets. This would technically only need to be true for the bullet each Soulmass spawns, and not the initial group of bullets that are spawned around you during the cast. However, a quick peek in Map Studio tells us that both the original and subsequent bullets are set to penetrate. This essentially means this sorcery is able to hit twice on a single enemy with a single cast, provided you are up its ass when said cast happens, because the original cluster of bullets are set to penetrate and therefore do not expire upon contact with the surface or an enemy. I used to hate this spell. Like, the amount of balls it took for this piece of shit to demand 43 FP tremendously upset me. But once you look at it as a close range damage option and start barrel stuffing fuckers with it the same way you would bursting fireball, for example, it becomes one of the most reliable upfront sources of damage the game ever gives you. Number 25, Vow of Silence. Cool sphere, Mr. Dr. Professor Sage. Please demonstrate how it works. No, take your time, I can wait. Nice magic bow, Aldrich. You ever thought of showing it to someone who gives a shit? What's wrong, Lorien? Can't hit anything with that demon penis you call a sword now that your spindly armed brother can't force panic dodges? You guys are pathetic. Honestly, I don't want to be too mean to this spell, but if I'm shoveling out 2 slots for a 15-second effect, it should just zip me right to the end credits. It could have no FP cost and still not be completely without its drawbacks. Needing to hit a refresh button every 15 seconds that requires 35 FP is a level of maintenance I almost can't subscribe to, but when this thing works, it works as shit. Spell slots honestly don't even matter with this on you, because the very next thing your ass is doing after casting is spamming your weapon art until whatever in front of you is dead or your fingers fall off. Number 24, Deep Soul. Dark sorceries tend to go by a specific theme that I think makes them very recommendable, which is their lower FP cost versus magic counterparts. Dealing dark damage instead of magic damage gives it some flexibility with staves like the Murky Longstaff and the Izalith Staff, in addition to the sorcery itself only asking 6 FP from the player. 100 dark damage in exchange for 6 FP is honestly a stupid good deal just because of how many stronger enemies are weak to the dark element. The lazy homing on it certainly helps for tracking down faster targets. I don't know, it's a straightforward bullet spammer. Of course it's good. Like, why do you need me to tell you this? Number 23, Projected Heal. I love the shit out of this miracle, and I tend to dislike healing miracles, so that's some pretty strong praise from me. Projected Heal shares an animation with Emit Force, which means it's the only strong heal that comes without the massive casting delay, and is also helped out a good deal by the Sage's Ring. It gives 170 base healing, which is honestly kinda ass, but it scales wonderfully with your faith stat and can easily heal you for around 500 or 600 at higher faith levels, which is basically a free Estus Flask. It's considerably faster than any other healing spell, and if you're in trouble, it's as easy as ducking behind a corner and just firing it into a fucking wall. Number 22, Lightning Stake. 3 consecutive hits is that weird ambivalent spot that exists between single-hit heavy hitter spells and multi-hit barrages that seem to never do the damage they're intended to. The stake inflicts 380 lightning damage in total, which places it slightly above Great Lightning Spear and slightly below Sunlight Spear. It's a great middle ground between the two miracles if you find Great Lightning Spear underwhelming damage-wise, but don't want to plug 48 FP into Sunlight Spear. But the reason I personally resonate with this miracle is that it is honest. There is no hidden second hitbox or smoke and mirrors, no hidden fees or bullshit interest rates. It's 3 zaps right in front of your goddamn face and nothing else. It also gets some unexpected hyper armor at the moment just before the cast goes through, which is a really nice quality of life benefit that I'm now wondering why other lightning miracles don't take advantage of. Number 21, Lifehunt Scythe. If you haven't figured it out yet, anything that deals dark damage in this game should be cherished and respected. Replenishing 68 base HP per enemy it hits is already enough to make this one of the most self-sustaining miracles available, but the 138 base damage it inflicts is deceptively powerful when cast with the Sunless Talisman or Carthus Chime. On an optimal build, this shit will be doing upwards of 800 damage and also restoring around 120 FP with good faith. I remember fully expecting this miracle to take up 2 spell slots and being very surprised that it didn't, just because of the sheer utility it gives you. This is one of the very few spells in the whole game I actually think would warrant a second spell slot. I'm glad it doesn't have one, and you certainly shouldn't give it one, FromSoft, but if it originally did, I probably wouldn't ask any questions. Number 20, Dark Edge. Dark Edge has comparable base damage to Soul Greatsword, but with slightly higher FP to cast. This contradicts the whole theme of dark sorceries and miracles, which is that they're usually more FP efficient than their non-dark equivalents. The base damage is usually less as well, but it just seems like more due to its ease of boosting with specific catalysts. Dark Edge is a glaring outlier, seeing that its base damage is actually higher by 5 points. Surprisingly useful for headshotting dragons due to the vertical hitbox, but the sorcery actually consumes FP far before when the spell itself comes out, which can lead to some really upsetting moments where you get flinched out of the cast and still consume the FP. A small annoyance, but one that you can easily prepare for. I still prefer it over the Soul Greatsword in most situations. Number 19, Lightning Storm. Overall less damage than Lightning Stake, but the Saint's Talisman can still squeeze a good 800 or so out of it, so it's really not a huge difference. The reason I and many others prefer Lightning Storm over Lightning Stake is due to the unapologetically non-urgent, apathetic, ass-draggingly slow lingering hitbox that stays active for way longer than it needs to. If you cast this, you're just safe to do whatever the hell you feel like doing for 2 full seconds. It can create healing windows, buffing opportunities, it's great for messing up the rhythm of those close to you, and it's an AoE. As is the case for most spells, 2 slots and 36 FP make me a little hesitant to say it's too good, but honestly, it's such a flexible miracle that seems to always help in whatever situation you're in that saying FP too high, her, and then moving on just feels disrespectful. Number 18, Hidden Body. Guys, I can't believe I'm saying this, but it actually doesn't suck. Quite the opposite. And the only reason I can think that's exciting to note is because my 2 years of Elden Ring experience convinced me that stealth was unexciting and bland. There are plenty of constricted areas in the game that promote stealthy shenanigans and general assholery made easy with Hidden Body. You can prevent so many different enemies from immediately zeroing in on you, and most of them are assholes too, so you absolutely shouldn't feel bad about it. Run past jailers with no effort, angels in the ringed city don't give a shit, backstabs become that much easier, and basically every enemy in the game just gets hit with a weird lag debuff for like 15 seconds. It's weird seeing that one of the most overrated sorceries in Elden Ring used to be one of the greatest just because of the player's surroundings. Number 17, Spook. Boo. Sorry if I scared you, just a little joke there. A completely unnecessary spell that turns into one of the most invaluable multi-purpose tools, all because you're playing as a character with knees made out of fucking baking powder. Obviously, immunity to fall damage doesn't include immunity to fall death, and there's only so far you can fall before the game reminds you you aren't too good for ladders, but this game is also much more vertically challenged than any of its successors, so a lot of traversal is going to involve taking some unnecessary damage every now and then, especially if you're speedrunning. And with this spell, you just flat out don't have to worry about any of that. This is one of the only spells in the game that allow you to literally skip large segments of the game without consequence, because the only thing better than dealing 3k damage with RTSR and double Morian blades is the emotional damage you're dealing by deadass ignoring a motherfucker. Number 16, Report. No idea why they relegated this ability to a shitty consumable item in Elden Ring, because this thing is just sinfully underestimated. Basic Lothric Knights can be affected by it, which is already a big enough help during the late game, but it can also influence deacons in the cathedral, pus of men after their transformation, both regular and golden winged knights, grave wardens, Millwood knights, Corvian knights, fucking demons. The only real downside, although kinda small, is that the pyromancy fires a tiny invisible bullet towards an enemy, which means it can still very easily miss if you're too careless with it. I also dig the lore implications here that flame is somehow just so alluring that it's able to hypnotize living beings with weaker mental constitution. I just always thought that was a really fascinating detail. Number 15, Great Heavy Soul Arrow. It's great, it's heavy, it's wow, goddamn, that's some damage. 240 base damage to be exact, which directly competes with Soul Spear despite less than half the FP cost. I'm not entirely sure if that makes this sorcery one of the infallible titans of the Dark Souls universe, or if Soul Spear just blows that much fucking buttocks. Number 14, Boulder Heave. If it didn't crash dive 2 feet in front of you, it would be the greatest pyromancy in the game. But sadly, equilibrium must be preserved. It actually has 2 separate hit IDs, the second of which accounts for splash damage, meaning it's the most rewarding if the enemies actually get hit by the boulder itself. Being able to stun lock anything in the game that isn't literally a brick wall is an exceptionally powerful utility to have, especially on a spell with this much upfront damage. Even if larger dudes don't get flung aside like a stack of office papers, they'll still get flinched out of whatever attack they were trying to do. Pairs wonderfully with Parting Flame because up someone's ass is the ideal position anyways, so you might as well score some free damage out of it too. Number 13, Great Soul Dregs. Exchanging 30 FP for 255 base dark damage means there is an entire blast radius of different spells in close proximity to this one that just get outright invalidated. Any use of Dark Edge or Affinity is now just for cosplay purposes at this point. This sorcery is your dad now. The homing on this projectile is never something anyone talks about because I guess lazy homing is just a given for most dark sorceries, but this dude is just built different. I've broken the lock-on so many times against bosses in big arenas, and this sorcery still reaches what I'm aiming at exactly as intended. It gets faster the longer it travels, so as long as you're not being a dunce and casting it inside a room with the total square feet of a fridge, then you'll just never miss with this. Number 12, Great Magic Barrier. I think a few people might feel like I'm overrating this spell a tiny bit, but a large reason why I vastly prefer this spell over regular Magic Barrier is that it's one of the only upgraded buffs with a duration that doesn't get massively downsized just because it's the upgraded version. 70 seconds is still a shitload of time, and just because it's given to you at Archdragon Peak doesn't mean there isn't plenty of opportunities ahead to squeeze some value out of it. Grand Archives, the Twin Princess fight, half the Ring City DLC. 2 slots isn't something I would normally justify, but when you're this deep into the game, you probably shouldn't be cycling through like 9 spell slot options anyway. Variety is not the spice of life in this game. If anything, it can ironically get you killed. Number 11, Great Deep Soul. It's the Deep Soul, but with every single benefit it carrying over to its great version. The damage this does in exchange for such a negligible amount of FP combined with the extra damage you can easily get from compatible catalysts honestly just needs to be looked at. I don't care if this game's 8 years old, something needs to be reconsidered here. The damage I can get out of this evil little purple testicle makes me feel legitimately disgusted with myself sometimes. Even against enemies resistant to dark damage, I still find it pulling some decent weight just due to the inconsequential FP cost. Silver Knights will never be a problem for you again. Nameless King might as well just park his ass on his spear and spread himself for you. And I don't know about how I've went the whole video without mentioning this, but the highest scaling staff in the entire game also buffs dark sorceries by a significant amount. Like, this spell is just set up to succeed as soon as you get it. Number 10, Great Magic Shield. 35 extra stability probably means nothing to some of you, because in Dark Souls 3, just about every shield with a surface area larger than the average end table is capable of blocking a solar flare. But with low enough stamina, not even that will matter. So, you know how in Elden Ring there was that brief moment in time where some great shields could actually go above 100 stability with the right setup, before FromSoft realized what a huge problem it was? Well, in this game, not only can most great shields exceed well past the 100 mark with this sorcery, but even the Black Knight shield can benefit from this due to its insanely high stability compared to other shields of its size. And the reason 100 stability is so important is a grand total stamina loss of fucking 0. Never worry about the kicks of enemy NPCs ever again. Tank entire combos from bosses like Sullivan. Park your shit right in front of Aldrich's stupid slimy ass when he brings his bow out and dare him to make you move. Number 9, the Crystal Soul Spear. FP efficiency is a highly overlooked facet of pure caster builds. Generally, the bigger the number, the more dopamine that gets farted out by your dumbass, barely functioning neurons, which is also why bonk builds have been king for 16 years. I consider myself a huge advocate for a healthy damage to FP ratio, but sometimes it really is better if shit just dies right the fuck now. If you're casting CSS as your main damage source, I can't make you give a shit about FP efficiency, but what you can do is use its piercing quality to your advantage by lining up multiple enemies and knocking them out with the same single cast, which is honestly nowhere near as difficult as it sounds. It even happens by accident half the time. Shooting this through 3 enemies at a time means you can brag about dealing 2400 total damage with only 48 FP, and suddenly your playstyle is much more conservative. Number 8, Great Combustion. Amazing damage? Yep. Gets boosted by Parting Flame? Yep. Better than Black Flame? Okay, well, no, obviously, but there are a few conditions. It's fast, it combos into a lot of different and equally powerful pyromancies, and using it in tandem with Parting Flame vastly enhances the total damage to such a point that it enters a league of its own. Fire damage is also a weakness of many of the game's most troublesome mini-bosses like the Deep Accursed and Sullivan's Beasts. It's just an element that no one outside of Carthus really knows how to properly defend against. It may not be the main weakness of bosses like Nameless King and Sister Frida, but the rapid casting speed makes Great Combustion so strong that an enemy's exact fire negation only seems to matter on paper. Number 7, Dorhys Gnawing. Dark damage, on the other hand, is an often polarizing element where enemies either get completely atomized by it, or they eat it up, lick their lips, and kindly ask for seconds. This is why the bleed buildup of Dorhys Gnawing actually ends up being a very convenient failsafe, because it allows the spell to deal massive instances of damage even to dark-resistant enemies. I'm not sure if this was made by design or anything, but there is a serious lack of enemies that end up having a resistance to both dark damage and bleed buildup, which puts miracles like Dorhys Gnawing in a very formidable position just because you always tend to be exploiting at least one good weakness with it. The only notable exception seems to be Deacons. And if you're having trouble killing those guys, then you need the kind of help this video probably can't give you. Number 6, Lightning Arrow. Okay, forget whatever the shit I said about Sunlight Spear. This is the true New Game Plus Lightning Miracle. It's placed near the shared grave bonfire, which likely means you have 3 bosses in the whole goddamn game left to even fight, but Madir has a lightning weakness though, so I guess the game is fair in giving you at least one good beefy boss to try it out on. The miracle itself is unexpectedly simple. No secondary hitbox unlike the other ranged lightning miracles, but the fact that you can just hold it down and fire it whenever gives you massive control over the tempo of so many fights both in and out of PvE. The FP to damage ratio does have me raising an eyebrow a bit, but I think the utility vastly outweighs the amount of damage. Sunlight Talisman can also lend itself to this spell pretty decently, as it does with all lightning miracles. Number 5, Black Flame. The upfront damage is insane, the casting time is quick enough to interrupt anything that ever thinks it can square up against you, but Jesus pelvis thrusting Christ, that FP to damage ratio is just not what I expected it to be. 25 FP FP for a pyromancy that's surprisingly easy to miss with due to overestimating the hitbox size. Casting it with the Parting Flame is a wonderful strategy since you're going to be casting this at melee range anyways, and the slightly lower scaling isn't really even that noticeable. As is the case with most dark pyromancies, the stamina damage feels like your enemy just headbutted a shield rather than holding one, and 240 dark damage is still pretty amazing when compared to most others. Whenever I write a longer script, there's always a particular segment I end up spending way too much time on because of how fierce the competition is between a select few options. So please enjoy the special concluding stretch of this video that absolutely everyone saw coming, the 4-Orb Fracas. Our contenders are the lovely yet simple Fire Orb, the multi-talented Great Chaos Fire Orb, the emotionally damaged Black Fire Orb, and the spicy and extravagant CBV. Number 4, Fire Orb. This is the bread, Great Combustion is the butter. Speaking pragmatically, this is really the only pyromancy you would ever need in the whole game. 225 fucking damage for what's basically a single square of FP, and the hitbox size allows it to hit multiple enemies if they're grouped together enough. It's just a little bit of all the best qualities a spell can have. I understand if you're trying to abide by a certain rule set or chase a specific build theme, but actually try and think of a reason you wouldn't have this equipped at any given time. Are you really struggling to reach that unrealistically high expectation of 8 in 10 faith? Is there even a single starting class that can't use this right out of the box? Okay, so just looked it up, there's 2, the Sorcerer and the Cleric, and they are both 1 stat point away from being able to use it anyways, so it doesn't even matter. It's good as a main, it's good as a backup, whatever situation you place this in, it always does something good. Number 3, Chaos Bed Vestiges. CBV has a whole ass ledger of practical features infrequently separated by the occasional minor inconvenience that I think ultimately prevents me from putting it in first place. I think the 2-slot investment is fine. Even the 35 FP cost I don't particularly mind, especially since it's 450 total fire damage we're talking about, but the extremely high stamina cost when casting takes away quite of spammability, one of the biggest reasons why the other Fire Orb variants are so strong. If you do have the stamina reserves to cast more than 2 in a row, you're probably not on your first playthrough. The AoE of the post-hit explosion is also way smaller than I expected it to be. Its radius is just barely larger than other Fire Orb pyromancies. If it's big enough to feel like you're just throwing an atom bomb into the general direction of something, you would expect for it to cover a massive area, but it just doesn't. But if you are looking for a dependable main cast starting into New Game Plus and beyond, CBV does fit that description pretty nicely. Number 2, Black Fire Orb. I think it would be cool if we saw the Grave Wardens in-game actually use an altered version of this pyromancy, since it was apparently discovered by them after Wolnir started huffing the farts of the abyss. All the benefits you've heard that are attached to this pyromancy are completely true. Better upfront damage than Fire Orb, obviously. Competes with even CBV in terms of FP efficiency, and with much more spam potential since it doesn't eat too deep into your stamina. But there's a hidden benefit I don't see most people talking about, and that's the amount of stamina damage it hits for. Great googly fucking moogly, 380 base stamina damage. CBV can't even do that shit. If you've ever wondered why everyone in the game suddenly develops plastic ankles when you whip this thing out, this number right here is exclusively why you feel like that. It's honestly hard for me to think of a single instance where I wouldn't rather have this over just about any other spell. I can't think of any challenging boss it would have trouble against except maybe Lorien, I guess. But everything about how the spell functions is just so torqued out of its mind that you can go through the whole game and not even realize there was an entire damage negation system involving elemental resistances and stuff that just didn't fucking apply to you. Number 1, Great Chaos Fire Orb. This has probably been my personal favorite pyromancy in the game for years, just because no one ever really takes their time to think about how versatile it is. Everyone gets thrown off by the double spell slot cost, but no one ever mentions the lack of stat requirements. People also seem to look at the additional magma pool as nothing more than a second instance of damage when it can actually flinch smaller enemies out of attacks and even hold them in place if you intend to hit them with something else. I like CBV because of its massive hit radius when traveling, and Black Fire Orb can eat up entire stamina bars in a single cast, but this is the only pyromancy I can think of with enough straightforward damage to take down bosses in a few casts on a good build, and comes with extra utility that makes it helpful versus smaller groups. I think Black Fire Orb tends to be the favorite just because enemies with a dark damage weakness seem to be incredibly weak against that particular element, with a damage negation of like minus 40% or something ridiculous. So if you're using both orbs the way they're intended, then yeah, you're probably gonna see Black Fire Orb climb a little higher on the damage scale. But GC is just so multi-purpose that once I get it, you might as well just hard program it into my slot bar, because I've never found a single reason to unequip it.